my worth to the family. I was locked inside a cage with a magical beast while holding nothing but a broken sword. The moment I swung my blade, I sliced through it as easily as cutting a chicken, but to my surprise, the creature was undead. The family had explained that the beast had been placed there as the perfect opponent to test my strength, while also saving them the trouble of disposing corpses afterward. I knew undead creatures could only be killed through fire or holy power, and since neither was available, I relied entirely on overwhelming force. Just as I was about to be overwhelmed, I drove my broken sword into the undead monster and released the hidden power sealed within me. The impact tore the creature apart instantly, though traces of it still remained. Everyone watching stood there in shock, unaware that I was actually a regressor. In my previous life, I belonged to the main house, and my father was Lord Roderick, the strongest man on the continent. He was sworn to protect the royal family and stood as the sole wielder of the Seven Wings. He saved me when I was on the verge of death, and from that moment, I devoted my entire life to repaying him. In the end, none of it mattered. People mocked me for being wingless. In this world, the winged crest was proof of magical power, and I was the only member of the ducal house incapable of awakening. Because of that, everyone called me wingless. Even so, I never stopped training. I pushed myself endless, believing my efforts would eventually pay off. At the end of it all, my men and I were cornered by the same people I had trusted. My father looked at me coldly and asked what purpose a broken tool could still serve now that its role had ended. Even in my battered state, I charged at him with everything I had and aimed for his neck. All I managed to do was leave behind a thin line of blood. Before I could react, my two siblings attacked from behind and severed my arm and leg. Blood poured from my mouth while they mocked me as I lay helpless on the frozen ground. They said crawling through the dirt suited someone like me. Filled with rage, I demanded to know why he had saved me in the first place if he intended to throw me away. Grabbing my head, my father finally revealed the truth. What he truly wanted was the power of the seven wings that slept within me. I could barely understand his words, released me, and calmly said my mother had served her purpose well by giving birth to a vessel that could be used for his ambition. I reached toward him and screamed as he walked away, and then my siblings finished what he started. Lying on the ice, I wondered if that was where I would die. I questioned everything I had done with my life. Suddenly, my surroundings began to change. I felt a faint warmth and thought I had finally reached the afterlife. When I coughed, I realized it was real. That was when I understood I had regressed. My body felt small and unfamiliar, and the moment I looked around, I realized I had become an infant. Beside me lay a corpse. I activated my magic and sensed people searching nearby. They were Lord Roderick's. The moment I heard that name, everything connected in my mind. I remembered the story about how I had once been found in a blizzard. I had truly returned to the past. I forced those thoughts aside because the only thing in my mind was escaping. I began crawling across the ice while magic power wrapped around my tiny body. I could barely breathe and every limb felt as though it had been thrown into fire, but my determination surpassed the pain. My desire to survive and take revenge kept me moving. Before I realized it, I had crawled an unbelievable distance before my strength finally gave out. At that moment, someone found me. A young girl called out to her father, the Viscount of House Hifrid, wondering why a child was lying in such a place. When he noticed the trail I had left behind, disbelief filled his eyes. I had crawled through the mountains just to survive. In that instant, he realized I would one day be terrifying. When I finally woke up, I found myself surrounded by a group of little girls staring at me, all of them wanting to play with me. Panic immediately took over because I had no idea what was happening around me. Terrified, I jumped away from them and started crawling as fast as I could, but the girls chased after me while shouting for me to stop. My survival instincts took control and I kept crawling, desperate to escape. In the process, I accidentally propelled myself into the sky with magic. The moment I realized what I had done, fear hit me instantly because I had no way to stop myself from falling. As I began crashing back toward the ground, I became certain I was about to die. Just before impact, someone caught me. Sweat covered my face as I realized how close I had come to death. The man holding me laughed and called me a mysterious child. The moment I looked at him properly, my entire body froze. I had landed in the hands of Hifrid, the Viscount of the Roderick domain. Shock overwhelmed me because there was no way I had ended up in another Elmheim household. Hifrid was the head of the Viscount family, branch family of the Elmheim bloodline, and one of the two wings once entrusted with protecting the royal family. What confused me even more, the fact that Hifrid should have already died during the worthless civil war that led to the complete destruction of the Viscount. That realization confirmed my worst fear. I had truly returned to the past. The situation left me completely shaken because I had tried escaping from Roderick only to end up in the hands of his own brother. Hifrid's wife gently carried me in her arms while talking about how shocked she was that my magic had spiraled out of control badly enough to launch from the sky. She quickly realized I had been trying to escape out of fear, so she kissed my forehead to reassure me that I was safe. As she softly stroked my cheeks, my body slowly relaxed. Hifrid then told his wife that I possessed enormous power and that the crest on my back proved it. She carried me toward a mirror so we could examine it together, and both of them were stunned when they saw 7 wings engraved on my back. Even I was shocked. The sight instantly brought back the final words Roderick had spoken to me before my death. At that moment, I finally understood the truth. He had saved me only so he could steal the power of the 7 wings for himself. The realization filled me with fury because I had spent my entire previous life being mocked, all because Roderick had stolen what was originally mine. Hifred's wife asked what they planned to do with me, and the moment I heard that, panic rushed through me again. There was no way I intended to let the power of the 7 wings remain within the Elmheim family when I needed it to take revenge on Roderick. To my surprise, Hifred told his wife that they should adopt me. He said I was still too young to survive on my own and that he would take responsibility for me until I became strong enough to take care of myself. That moment, the door suddenly burst open, and the girls from earlier tumbled into the room after secretly listening the entire time. They admitted they had been worried about me, and bright smiles spread across their faces as they celebrated finally having a baby brother. Not long after that, the lady of the house gave me the name Aster. 10 years later, Hifred, my sister Alphen, and I traveled to the Sword Dance Assembly, an annual gathering hosted by one of the Duke families under the Elmheim banner. It was a social event where martial noble families gathered to strengthen alliances while displaying the talents of young swordsmen who carried their family names. The moment we arrived, the nobles and spectators immediately began whispering among themselves. They mocked the Viscount family and claimed we had come only to embarrass ourselves once again. Many of them already knew about me, adopted child taken in because the family failed to produce a proper heir of their own. To them, the Viscount family had become nothing more than a disgrace to the Elmheim name. Alphen heard every insult directed at us and quietly told me not to let any of it affect me. She reminded me that anyone who showed weakness in this place would immediately be crushed. Even while saying those words, I could see her hands trembling with anger. Hifred then told me that what I was witnessing was the current standing of the Viscount family. He explained that this humiliation was exactly what he wanted me to see, and he asked if I felt disappointed after witnessing it for myself. I told him I had no problem standing in such a hostile environment. Hearing that made Hifred burst into laughter, and he admitted that my attitude reassured him. In my previous life, I had entered noble society as the disgrace of the Elmheim family, which was why this place carried nothing but bitter memories. This time, however, everything was different because the 7 wings had returned to me. As I looked up, I spotted the same brothers who had murdered me in my past life staring down from a window above. The sight of them only strengthened my resolve, as this time, I intended to make a glorious debut before all of them. We lived in an era where knights ruled the world and true power was measured through mastery of the blade. The ultimate peak of swordsmanship was represented by a single symbol, the wing crest. As we stood on the balcony watching the duels below, Alphen admitted that the entire atmosphere felt overwhelming. He finally understood why Furine and Fleur had no interest in attending the festival. Meanwhile, I could not stop remembering the humiliation I suffered during the same event in my previous life. Noticing I had gone silent, Alphen called my name and pulled me back to reality before asking if I was nervous. She told me it was understandable since my first sword dance festival. I told her I was not nervous. What I felt was nostalgia. To me, every part of this place felt disgusting. Not long after, Hifred informed us that he had to leave for an important meeting. Before leaving, he told me he was placing Alphen in my care, which immediately made her protest since she was older than me by a year. I teased her by saying she was too clumsy to be trusted on her own, making Hifred laugh. He then reminded me that many children my age had gathered at the festival and encouraged me to use the opportunity to build friendships and connection. However, before leaving, he quietly warned me to make sure nobody discovered the existence of the 7 wings. Once he walked away, I found myself in an awkward position because hiding the 7 wings was far easier said than done. On top of that, I had no idea how I was supposed to socialize when nearly everyone there already viewed me with hostility. As I started walking away, Alphen stopped me and asked where I was going. I casually told her I was heading out to make friends. Eventually, I arrived at the area where Roderick's sons were gathered. The red-haired Dallas looked at me with confusion and demanded to know who I was. With a smile on my face, I introduced myself as his younger brother and explained that I had noticed him earlier, so I decided to greet him personally. Dallas looked completely lost until his brother Guion explained that I was the adopted child taken in by the Viscount family. The moment Dallas understood who I was, he burst into laughter and mocked me for carrying the F initial instead of the prestigious A used by the direct bloodline. I remained silent because I could not forget that these same brothers had murdered me in my previous life. Looking at them now, I could hardly believe I had once feared them so much. Instead of terrifying figures, they looked like nothing more than children pretending to be important. Before the situation could continue, Alphen arrived and told me to stop bothering them. He tried pulling me away, but Dallas immediately called out to mock her as well. He sneered at her and asked if she was still hiding behind her father's protection, sarcastically telling her to stay and entertain them like an escort. Alphen turned around with a cold expression and told him she had no interest in his nonsense. She reminded him that the main family and branch families were not bound by any master-servant relationship. Even after that, he continued trying to drag me away while I insisted that I was not finished speaking. Dallas decided to push things even further by mocking Alphen in front of everyone. He loudly told his group that her father was the knight who failed to protect the king and ended up having his hand severed by Roderick as punishment. He laughed while saying he was grateful not to carry the blood of a failure in his veins. Alphen could not endure the insult any longer. He turned back in fury and shouted at him to take those words back because she would never allow anyone to insult her father like that. Instead of stopping, Dallas humiliated her even more by spitting wine directly onto her. He sneered that she came from a family filled with useless women who could never inherit a title. Then he mocked her appearance, saying they were not attending a ballroom and that she should wear rags next time so getting soaped would not matter. Before coming to the gathering, I had been worried that seeing Dallas and Guion again would no longer make me feel anger. The moment I watched them humiliate Alphen, every doubt disappeared. I calmly called Dallas by name before throwing a bottle of wine toward him. The instant he caught it, I drew my sword and sliced the bottle clean in half, causing the wine to pour directly over his head. Dallas froze in shock while I casually mocked him, saying the drink was only grape juice, which suited a spoiled noble brat like him perfect. 3 years earlier, during a duel, I had once lost control of my power and nearly killed my own sisters. Hifrid had stepped in personally to suppress the overwhelming force I released, and that moment became the first time he witnessed the true power of the Seven Wings. Even then, he questioned whether such power could ever truly be controlled, either by himself or by me. Back in the present, Hifrid was still attending his meeting when a servant suddenly rushed inside to report that something serious had happened. The servant explained that a duel had broken out between members of the branch family and the direct bloodline. The moment Hifrid heard that, he immediately rushed toward the arena. On the way, he encountered Alphen and quickly demanded an explanation for what had happened. At the same time, the family elders had already gathered around the arena to witness the duel themselves. Hifrid and Alphen joined them on the balcony overlooking the battlefield. Unlike the others, the elders appeared excited because they understood how chaotic the aftermath could become depending on who won. Dallas glared at me and called me an idiot for daring to challenge someone from the ducal house. He reminded me that I was nothing more than a half-blood child raised in the wilderness. Then he proudly declared that I could never understand the difference in power between us because he possessed a four-wing crest. The spectators were left stunned by Dallas's talent, and many of them believed this was exactly why he had been chosen as the heir of the Duke family. Holding 2 swords, Dallas mocked me and demanded that I reveal my crest unless I was too ashamed to show it. I replied that I was not pathetic enough to run around proudly showing off nothing more than a simple pattern. My words instantly angered him, but I continued speaking. I told him that if I won the duel, he would apologize to Alphen in front of everyone. Dallas accepted the condition without hesitation, but in return, he declared that if he won, he would turn me into his personal dog. The moment the duel began, Dallas charged straight at me while threatening to work me to death after defeating me. His sword came crashing down, and although I managed to block the strike, the force behind it pushed me backward while sending vibrations through my arms. Dallas attacked again immediately, boasting that the power I was witnessing came from a four-wing crest. He continued swinging relentlessly, forcing me to remain on the defensive. One of the elders observing the duel admitted that Dallas's swordsmanship itself was still immature, but his overwhelming magical power compensated for it completely. That was why those born with crests naturally held an advantage over everyone else. If the magic inside a single wing crest could be compared to the flame of a candle, then the power contained within 4 wings was closer to a violent explosion. Dallas kept overwhelming me with non-stop attacks while mocking me for losing the confidence I displayed earlier. He sarcastically asked if I was not the same person who had demanded an apology moments ago. As he continued attacking, he repeatedly provoked me and demanded that I show him my true strength. A moment later, Dallas unleashed a strike he believed would finish the duel, but I blocked it as energy surged around my body. The impact sent Dallas flying backward while I coldly told him that he talked far too much. For the past 10 years, I had trained endlessly for one purpose alone: vengeance against those who destroyed my life. I instantly closed the distance between us and delivered a powerful strike that shattered Dallas's balance. He crashed to his knees while desperately trying to defend himself, and even John looked shocked to see his brother being forced backward. Dallas could not comprehend what was happening. Despite possessing a 4-wing crest, he was being completely overwhelmed by someone he considered beneath him. Everyone watching the duel stared in disbelief as he struggled desperately to stay in the fight. Meanwhile, Hifred's expression darkened because he could already tell the situation was spiraling out of control. As I continued attacking, memories from my previous life flashed through my mind. I remembered Dallas and Gion severing my arm before murdering me without hesitation. For the first time, fear appeared in Dallas's eyes as he watched death approach him. He began begging me to stop, while at the same moment Hifred shouted from the balcony, ordering me to restrain myself. Our final clash triggered a massive explosion across the arena. When the smoke finally cleared, Dallas's sword had been cut clean in half. My strike barely missed Dallas's head and instead shattered the sword position between his legs. The moment he realized how close he had come to death, fear consumed him completely, and he ended up soiling himself. I mocked him the same way he had mocked Alphen earlier. I told him that next time he should come dressed in rags so he would not mind getting soaked. After saying that, I calmly sheathed my sword and declared that I was no longer Aster the Wingless. The moment I accepted that truth, a sense of relief washed over me. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming presence behind me. When I turned around, I immediately recognized the person standing there, Roderick. The entire arena fell silent in shock because nobody expected someone from the Branch family to defeat a son of the main household. At the same time, everyone understood the situation had become dangerous. There was no chance Roderick would quietly tolerate the humiliation brought upon the direct bloodline. Roderick stepped into the arena and slowly approached me. Despite the pressure pouring from him, I refused to lower my gaze and stared directly into his eyes. Even standing before the strongest man on the continent, I refused to back down. Meanwhile, Dallas rushed toward his father, convinced he had come to save him. Acting like the spoiled child he was, he complained that I had dared to disrespect the main family despite being nothing more than a half-blood outsider. He begged Roderick to use his authority to punish me. Instead, Roderick silently forced a sword into Dallas's hand before driving it straight into the ground. The impact shattered Dallas's right hand instantly. Everyone watching froze in disbelief, including Gion. Roderick coldly berated Dallas for disgracing the family name while still having the nerve to smile afterward. Then, Roderick drew his own sword. The moment Hifred saw that, he immediately understood what was about to happen and shouted at him to stop. Ignoring the warning, Roderick raised his blade and prepared to execute his own son for bringing shame upon the family, declaring that Dallas lacked the qualifications to wield a sword. Before he could strike, I stepped between them. Roderick glared at me and demanded to know why I was interfering with his judgment. Calmly answered that Dallas still had not apologized to Alphen, so he was not allowed to die yet. I told him he could do whatever he wanted afterward, once the apology was made properly. My response instantly angered Roderick. He mocked me for acting as though I truly belonged to the family, despite being adopted. I answered without hesitation that I was the son of the Viscount. Even if we did not share blood, I had learned from my father the pride of a knight and the responsibility carried by a household name. Rodri chose to turn my own words against me. He stated that as a member of the Viscount house, I had already tarnished the reputation of the main family, the pride of the king's sword. He warned that what had just occurred was not something that could be dismissed as a childish dispute. He reminded me that Hifred had once paid with his arm when he made a mistake. Then he asked me what I was prepared to sacrifice in return. I responded that this was not a sibling quarrel, but a legitimate duel. I told him that I had only answered the insults directed at the house of the Viscount with my blade. I reminded him of his own words, that those who cannot avenge themselves have no right to wield a sword. I made it clear that I had no intention of sacrificing even a single strand of my hair. One of the elders, an earl, was visibly shaken by my words and refused to believe I was only 10 years old. After hearing me out, Rodri told me to take my stance. I immediately shifted into a defensive posture. In the next instant, his strike sent me crashing into the wall with a deafening explosion. The impact shocked everyone, and many believed I was finished. Hifred immediately leapt forward in anger, drawing his sword against his brother, but Rodri blocked the attack without difficulty. Ignoring him completely, Hifred rushed toward me instead. As the dust settled, I saw my broken sword lying on the ground. However, I was still standing, gripping the remaining half of the blade, refusing to fall. My expression was filled with hatred as I held my ground. When Rodri saw my state, he simply turned away and left, taking Dallas with him. Only then did my body finally give out. I lost my balance, but Hifred caught me before I fell completely. With the last of my strength, I told him I had protected Alphen, just as I promised. Hifred looked at me and commended me, saying I had been magnificent. One of the elders then mocked Rodri, saying he had resorted to a childish action. Rodri did not deny it, but he explained that allowing me to continue would have destroyed the reputation of the family, so he had made a necessary compromise. The elder referred to me as a rising star, saying I had the strength and boldness to stand before the great Roderick. The other elders agreed that my debut in noble society had been the most unforgettable one in recent history. One of them admitted he had even feared the Elmheim family might split apart because of the incident. However, Rodri warned them not to celebrate too early. He spoke of an approaching era of disruption, calling it a storm that could divide the world into 2 or even 3 factions. After returning to the territory, I immersed myself completely in training. I defeated every sparring partner with ease. None could stand against me. Many believe the incident at the sword dance assembly had become my motivation. The servants and guards were also pleased that I had defeated Dallas. The main family had long made life difficult for them. Internally, I believed my actions at the assembly had silenced those who once mocked the Viscount house. However, my true target remained Roderick himself. Although I understood that I could not match him at my current level, I also knew that the wing crest was only a measure of rank and latent magical potential. Still, I could not yet fully draw out the power of the 7-wing. Being born with it or without it meant nothing if it cannot be fully controlled. What I wanted most was to test the true limits of the 7 wings without fearing that its power would go out of control and consume everything. Before I knew it, I had defeated everyone on the training grounds. At that moment, Alphen arrived and told me that our father was calling for me. I immediately stopped what I was doing and followed her. As we walked, I noticed she was wearing a training outfit. I teased her, reminding her that she once said she hated it because it was uncomfortable. Alphen replied that everything required balance, and that seeing me had made her reconsider the way she had been approaching her own training. She then told me that I would have to train with her when I returned, smiled and told her to go easy on me. Soon after, I arrived at Hifred's office and asked what he needed. He told me to sit down, and once I did, he reminded me that it had been 10 years since he brought me into the family. He said he had originally planned to wait until I was older before deciding anything, but he had changed his mind. Then he took out a ring with a red jewel and told me it was the symbol of the next head of the family. He revealed that he wanted me to become the next head of the Viscount house. I said nothing. Hifred continued, explaining that the Viscount house was in a fragile position despite still being a branch of the Elmheim family. Since we governed our own territory, he said it could not remain without a successor to lead it. I asked if my sisters agreed with this decision. Hifred replied that he intended to go to the Knight Academy to inform them personally. I told him that Malfa and Kudo would most likely reject the idea, especially Kudo, who already despised me for being a boy and for possessing the 7 wings. I stood up and told him I could not accept the responsibility of becoming the next head. I reminded him that I could not even fully control my own magic and that I had once nearly killed my sister because of it. I added that there was nothing more stubborn than an angry sister who had already made up her mind. As I turned to leave, Hifred said he had always been unsure whether I truly behaved like a child or not. He then revealed that he had originally intended the ring as a reward for my performance at the sword dance assembly, but it seemed I preferred something else. He opened a box and revealed a magic sword named Graham, a weapon that appeared more like a dagger. He explained that it was a sword capable of regulating and controlling the power of the 7 wings. After our discussion, Hifred led me into the forest. I asked why we had to go so far just to test a sword. He replied that it was a necessary precaution. He said he could not take any risks, especially since I had a habit of breaking things. According to him, the training hall would not survive what we were about to attempt. Hifred explained to me that Graham was a magic sword traditionally passed down only to the eldest son of the Elmheim family. He admitted that he had deliberately requested it from the main house because of me. He then removed the cloth covering it, and I was shocked to see that it was nothing more than a blade with a short base. Hifred told me that although the sword had no physical blade, it could form one through the wielder's magic. By imbuing it with mana, the user's own power would shape and complete the weapon. To demonstrate, he released his magic into it. In an instant, a massive burst of energy exploded outward, tearing through everything in its path and leaving a huge crater in the ground. He then warned me that attempting to forcibly overpower it would only drain the user instead. He said it was a weapon with a long history and asked if I was willing to try it. I took the sword. The moment I did, my mana began flowing into it on its own. A powerful surge erupted upward, sending a blast into the sky. Back at the estate, the guards witnessed the phenomenon, and one of them assumed a comet was falling. His partner corrected him, saying it was something shooting upward instead. First guard refused to believe it until Alphen stepped in and stated that the cause had to be me. Meanwhile, in the forest, I was stunned by the sword's power. Hifred corrected me, saying it was not the sword that was extraordinary, but my magic itself. He explained that throughout the entire history of the Elmheim lineage, no one had ever possessed the 7-wing crest. He believed that if I mastered it, I could even surpass Roderick. However, he also warned that such power would inevitably attract conflict. If others discovered I possessed the 7 wings, some would try to exploit me, while others would seek to eliminate me under the excuse that I was a threat to the world. He urged me to become strong enough to protect myself while I still had time. I agreed with him because I had no intention of living another miserable life like the one I had experienced before. I thanked him for the sword and promised that I would master both the Seven Wings and Graham. 3 days later, Kudo and Malfa returned from the Night Academy. Kudo stretched out her arms, expecting her younger sisters to run into her embrace, but they ignored her and ran straight to Malfa instead. He was shocked and demanded an explanation. The girls replied that she always messed up their hair. Kudo refused to accept it, insisting that she was far too elegant to do such a thing. At that moment, she spotted Alphen and rushed over to hug her, immediately doing exactly what she had just denied by messing up Alphen's hair. Malfa then asked where it was. Hifrid told them, and Kudo immediately became alert the moment she heard my name. Meanwhile, I was still struggling to control the sword. Just maintaining it caused an excessive drain on my magic, and I began to question what I needed to do to reach the level of my father. While I was still thinking, Kudo appeared with her sword and told me I had managed to surpass myself once again. I was shocked to see she had returned, and she immediately scolded me for not coming to greet her. She asked if I had deliberately avoided her because I believed I was important enough not to acknowledge them. She also told me she had already heard about what happened at the sword dance assembly. Since the Night Academy had been filled with rumors about me, I replied that the same could be said of her, since I had heard she had completed numerous missions as a trainee. I also mentioned that she was the only knight in her year to receive an honorary knight medal. Kudo responded that it was the least she could do, since anything less would make it impossible for her to succeed her father. She then brought up the fact that I had refused the position of successor and asked if I had done it for her sake. Internally, I was displeased that Hifrid had told her about it, since it would only create unnecessary complications. I told her I had declined because I believed I was not yet worthy. Kudo walked toward a tree while commenting that both Hifrid and I were being unnecessarily stubborn, even though we knew it was her dream to become the head of the house. Without warning, she cut down the tree and threw it straight at me. I barely managed to dodge it and immediately shouted at her, asking what she was trying to do. She calmly replied that it had been a long time since we last sparred, and that she intended to test me. She added that her next attack would be aimed directly at me. I tried to tell her to stop because the sword I was using was still incomplete, but she replied that I would not be able to use that excuse on a battlefield. She reminded me that a knight's duty was to always be prepared for combat and immediately assumed an offensive stance. She warned me that if I continued holding back, she might actually kill me. That moment, I realized she was completely serious. I could barely believe it, but I had no choice but to respond with full focus. If I hesitated, she truly would not hold back. A few minutes later, we were still exchanging blows. Kudo acknowledged that I had improved, saying I was able to keep up with her despite her refined skills from the Night Academy. However, she continued to mock my sword, calling it pathetic and criticizing my lack of control over my magic. With a single strike, she sent me flying backward. As I recovered, I admitted that she had always been this relentless. She had been like this since we were children. I began to wonder if it was because I was the only male and the Viscount had the right of succession, or perhaps it was because I possessed the seven-wing crest, something superior to everything around me. I compared Kudo to a living storm because she always came at me like a force of nature, challenging me to duels over the smallest things while calling the world unfair. In my mind, she was my natural enemy. Kudo charged at me again, declaring that I was not fit to become the next head of the house. Meanwhile, Malfa looked on with growing concern and called Hifrid's attention to us. She asked if he truly intended to leave us alone in this state because at this rate one of us might end up dead. Hifrid told her that we were rivals in our own way, and, although we were reckless, he believed it would not escalate to the point of death. Malfa replied that she hoped he was right, then asked why he had brought them back from the Night Academy, since she was certain it was not solely about succession. Hifrid confirmed her suspicion and produced a letter which immediately shocked her. It was a summons from the Elmheim main house. He explained that the elders might finally want to see their grandson in person. Malfa felt relieved at first, but Hifrid added that in the worst case, they might end up losing me. Back in the forest, I told Kudo again to listen to reason since I had already rejected the offer of succession. I reminded her that Hifrid must have told her this already, but she revealed that he was not willing to accept my decision. Kudo continued her assault, and I was forced to block her overwhelming strikes, comparing her movements to a troll swinging a massive warhammer. I barely managed to redirect her blade, shouting at her to hear me out. Instead, she struck me with a blunt blow powerful enough to shake my internal organs. I coughed up blood, realizing just how strong she truly was. She told me I was third-rate if I could only swing a sword, second-rate if I could only use magic, and first-rate only when I could master both sword and magic together. She said she was disappointed in me because, despite the difference in our crest levels, I should have been able to withstand her attacks. Instead, I kept relying on swordsmanship alone. She asked whether I truly distrusted my own power, or whether I feared going berserk again like before. The moment I heard that, I realized something I had never admitted to myself. I had been afraid of the seven wings all along. I had been unconsciously limiting my own power, which was why the sword felt unstable in my hands. I had been suppressing my magic out of fear that it would spiral out of control. Kudo told me that I had everything she ever wanted. Then she lunged at me again, demanding that I release all my power if I was so afraid to use it. But this time, something changed. I effortlessly knocked her back with my magic. Even she looked shocked. I thanked her, telling her she had opened my eyes. Then, I dashed forward without forming a blade, leaving her to wonder if I had run out of mana. She quickly dismissed the thought, knowing that I had not. Aster understood that the magic contained within the seven wings was essentially inexhaustible. Although he could not yet fully control it, he decided to compress all of that power into a single immediate burst of impact. At that moment, his attack landed, but Kudo blocked it while still managing to tease him, saying it was commendable that he had managed to come up with such a response on the spot. Aster then told her that he had no intention of wasting his second life, his power, his sword, or his family. He said he intended to hold on to all of it tightly because he had once struggled to obtain even a fraction of it in the past. Kudo paused, confused by his mention of a second life. Without warning, I leapt toward her again. She prepared to counter immediately. But in the next instant, I vanished. By the time I reappeared, I told her that I was no longer holding back. I brought my sword down with full force, and in that moment, it felt as though it passed cleanly through her midsection. Later, Kudo woke up in her room, confused about how she had gotten there. To her surprise, Malfa was by her side, welcoming her back. It slowly dawned on her that she had been in the middle of a duel, and she immediately asked what had happened. Malfa explained that Aster had been the one who carried her back to the estate and that Kudo had apparently fallen asleep during the duel. Aster had assumed the exhaustion from her journey had finally caught up to her. However, Kudo disagreed with that explanation. She then recalled the moment in the duel where it felt as though Aster had cut through her. She realized that he had dispelled his mana blade at the very last instant before impact. What she had felt was only the residual flow of mana passing through her body. She let out a sigh of relief, realizing that Aster would not have killed her since they were siblings. Yet at the same time, she could not deny that, in that moment, she had truly feared he might. She could not shake the thought that her brother was incredibly ruthless, even though he was smaller than her. Kudo immediately grabbed her sword and demanded to know where Aster was, insisting that their duel was not over. Malfa then shocked her by revealing that Aster was no longer in the estate. She explained that a summons had arrived from the main house and he had left with Hifrid shortly after. Kudo froze in disbelief, furious that no one had told her sooner. Meanwhile, Aster and Hifrid were traveling in a carriage toward the main house. Hifrid told me that the people we were going to meet were the elders who controlled the Elmheim household from the shadows. He explained that the elders were former heads of both the main and branch families, meaning they were influential figures from across the entire Elmheim house. Hifrid assured me that even in retirement they still effectively controlled the family, which was why they were referred to as the Shadow Rulers. He also said those elders had shown no interest in me since the day I was adopted, which made him just as confused as I was about why they had suddenly summoned me now. I told him it was most likely because of what had happened at the Sword Dance Festival. I added that I had heard the Elmheim elders valued the family's prestige more than gold or even their own lives, and that anyone who tarnished it was reportedly thrown into cages and left as food for beasts. Hifrid was shocked that I knew such a thing and asked where I had heard it. I gave a vague, nervous answer that avoided the question, then said I had already prepared myself for punishment, or at the very least, exile. Hifrid asked if I was truly ready to leave without saying goodbye. I told him I was. I explained that I had already planned to leave once my sisters arrived. I also added that Kudo clearly disliked having me around because I annoyed her and that she would likely feel more at ease once I was gone. I said that thanks to her, I had finally begun to understand how to use Graham properly, and I was now confident I could draw up more of the Seven Wings' power than before. I told him not to try to interfere or help me from that point onward, no matter what happened, because I intended to survive on my own. Suddenly, Kudo appeared at the carriage window. She told me that I was the youngest, so I had no right to act as though I was above everyone else. I was shocked to see her hanging there like a bug clinging to the carriage. She then pulled the door open and climbed inside, clearly having chased us all the way. She immediately scolded me for leaving without saying a word to her. She added that she had heard I had been summoned by the great elders of the main house, which was significant since neither she nor Malfa had ever been called before. Hifrid told her that she could not accompany us to the main house. She replied that she already knew that, which was why he had recalled them from the academy to ensure they could watch over things in his absence. She then added that she understood the summons meant I was entering a situation that required extreme caution. Malfa had even said there was a possibility I might not return. I tried to downplay it, telling her she was exaggerating and that I was only going there to talk. Deep down, however, I knew my return was not guaranteed. Kudo then admitted that she hated me. She said she hated that I was a boy, that I possessed the 7 wings, that I always received special treatment, and that I was stronger than her despite being younger. She said she hated everything about it. But even so, she said she could not ignore the fact that I was her family. She told me that no matter how much I acted mature or distant, I was still her little brother. Kudo urged me to make sure I returned to the estate because she still intended for us to finish our duel. As she left, she warned me that she would not make things easy for me next time. She then leapt out of the carriage, and I watched her go as she disappeared into the distance. I could not understand why she had come all the way just to say that, but I felt a quiet sense of gratitude toward her. In silence, I made up my mind to return to the family. Soon after, we arrived at the main house and were immediately met by armed guards. They informed Hifrid that the elders were already waiting inside. Hifrid told them there was no need to escort him since he already knew the way, but the guards replied that they had been ordered to bring both him and me to the waiting room. At that moment, Hifrid confirmed that the summons was not meant as a simple family visit. It brought back memories of the last time he had been here. As we walked through the lobby, Hifrid told me not to lose control of my emotions, saying it would be the worst possible place for me to act on anger. I replied that I would remain calm as long as they did not say or do anything to provoke me. Hifrid agreed, but also warned me that the people we were about to meet were the real issue. However, while he was explaining, I found myself distracted by the training grounds outside. Hifrid had to call my name to pull me back to reality. At the entrance to the chamber, we were required to surrender our weapons. Once we entered, we were greeted by an elder who immediately teased Hifrid for not returning to the house in the past 10 years. Hifrid bowed and addressed him as his great-grandfather, the 6th head of the house. Only then did I realize who stood at the center of the shadows controlling the Elmheim family, Zenas Elmheim. I also understood that the others in the room were influential figures who held real authority over the direction of the house. A quick glance showed me that several individuals from the Sword Dance Festival were also present. However, I noticed that Roderick was absent. Zenas noticed my confusion and explained that Roderick was not present because he served as the leader of the knights directly under the royal family and had no time for administrative meetings like this. Instead, Zenas and the other elders handled the governance of the house. I recalled that in my previous life, I had never once seen Zenas, yet his influence was clearly absolute, as he had gathered so many powerful figures in one place. Hifrid asked why we had been summoned. Zenas replied that he was certain Hifrid already knew the answer. He stated that he had heard about the incident at the Sword Dance Festival and that it had caused quite a disturbance. That statement confirmed my suspicion that I had been summoned because of that event. Hifrid responded that Roderick should have handled the matter personally. However, one of the elders stated that what Roderick had done was merely for public appearance and did not erase the fact that the Elmheim name had been stained. Another elder added that bringing me, an adopted child of unknown origin, into the family had already been a mistake. They said they would have ignored me if I had remained harmless, but the moment I challenged the main family, everything changed. Zenas stated that exile would be the appropriate punishment for me, and also revealed that Hifrid himself would be punished as well. At that moment, I stood up and raised my voice, saying that I was the only one responsible for everything and that it had nothing to do with my father. As I spoke, I suddenly realized that Hifrid remained silent, offering no response. I stopped for a moment, unsettled by his silence. The elders immediately reprimanded me for being undisciplined and interfering in an adult discussion. Zenas then rose and stated that everyone in the room bore the weight of the house on their shoulders. However, Zenas stated that the knights were not a unified body as countless others operated in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to seize control of the top position. He added that this included even those present in the room. Zenas then walked toward me and said they needed proof that I was not a threat to the house. He took out a sword and handed it to Hifrid. As he did, he reminded Hifrid of the past failure where he could not protect the king, an incident that had stained the family's reputation. He revealed that it had also been in this very room where Hifrid allowed Roderick to sever his arm. This time, Zenas declared that Hifrid would prove his loyalty by taking my head. He assured him that if he complied, the matter would be resolved. Before he could finish speaking, Hifrid refused. He stated that he had no intention of taking my life and that he would rather die himself than kill his own child. I was shocked to hear this. Zenas then calmly stated that Hifrid's refusal meant he would have to die as well. He further declared that the Viscount house was finished and that everyone in it, including the children, would be eliminated. At that moment, I spoke coldly and asked Zenas what exactly he was afraid of. Zenas turned in confusion, and I continued, stating that they were nothing more than grown men gathered together in fear, which I found pathetic. I told him that if they were so afraid of me returning to hunt them down, they were free to exile me now. Then I removed my shirt. The 7 wings were revealed across my back, shining with a terrifying brilliance. I exposed them to make it clear exactly what they would be facing if they tried to harm my family. The entire room fell into shock. I silently apologized to Hifrid because despite being told to remain quiet, I could not hold back any longer. With the crests glowing intensely, I told them it would be wise to reconsider making me their enemy. The elders and guards refused to believe what they were seeing, insisting it must be some kind of illusion since it had not appeared on a human body in hundreds of years. In a cold voice, Zenas asked if I truly understood the weight of the mark I carried. I replied that I did, adding that people were always surprised by the number of wings one possessed. An earl sitting among the elders laughed loudly, but quickly apologized and told them to continue. Zenas then explained that a crest was an organ that generated magical power, originally granted to humans by spirits in ancient times. While humanity had learned to pass these crests down through generations, no one had ever reached 7 wings, with the sole exception of the Spirit Clan, the original progenitors of the crests themselves. I asked Zenas if he was suggesting that I was a member of the Spirit Clan. Zenas replied that there was a possibility if the 7 wings I carried were truly real. I told him I was Hifrid's son, and that at the moment I did not care about the circumstances of my birth. I said that all I wanted to know was whether he was prepared to make me his enemy or not. I added that there would be plenty of noble houses willing to take me in if I were ever expelled from Elmheim. I warned him that this would be dangerous for them since they were already afraid of rebellion. I said it would be wiser to keep me within the house as a symbol of the 7 wings that even surpassed Roderick. The room fell completely silent at my words. Deep down, I understood exactly what I was doing. I remembered Zenas mentioning rebellion earlier, and I knew it was not an empty warning. Large civil war was approaching, one that would engulf the entire country. Because of my previous life, I already knew what was coming, and I intended to use that knowledge to determine who would become ally or enemy so the Viscount house could survive. Zenas scoffed and asked if I truly believed I held that level of importance. He said there was no proof that the 7 wings I claimed to possess were real. I told him he was free to kill me if he did not believe it. However, I added that doing so would only spark war between him and the Viscount house. I knew very well that Elmheim could eliminate me if it truly wished to, but I wanted to see whether they would take the bait. That moment, Earl Mays clapped his hands and stood up, suggesting that a trial should be set for me instead. The elders immediately objected and demanded to know what he was implying. Mays asked whether they were truly willing to witness the power of the 7 wings or not. When they asked what he meant, he reminded them that they were in the greatest martial clan, meaning there would always be suitable trials available within the estate. At that point, I realized Mays was likely an ally. Unexpectedly, Zenas agreed to the suggestion. He told me to follow him, stating that it was his duty as my grandfather to discipline a grandson who did not know how to control his tongue. Moments later, we arrived at the trial grounds, which were dimly lit and heavy with atmosphere. Zenas revealed an underground passage leading toward the waterways, explaining that it had once served as an emergency evacuation shelter. Zenas revealed that a magic beast had been sealed inside the underground chamber. He stated that the trial was simple. I was to defeat it. Hifrid sighed in frustration and reminded me that he had warned me to keep the existence of the 7 wings hidden. I told him I could not keep something so conspicuous a secret forever. As I descended into the pit, Hifrid warned me not to lower my guard. While going down, my eyes briefly met Maze's and I could see clear interest in his expression as he observed me. When I reached the bottom, I felt something cold nearby. I looked down and froze when I saw Dallas's head lying on the ground. The shock ran through me immediately. Zenas explained that he had also given Dallas a chance to redeem his honor, but he had only cried until the end, which had been unbearable to watch. He then told me not to disappoint him. At that moment, a blue magic beast appeared before me and let out a loud roar, signaling that this was no ordinary trial. Despite everything, felt a moment of pity for Dallas. Even if he had been irritating, I had not expected this. The beast suddenly charged at me, but I cut it apart with a single swing of my sword. The spectators above were left speechless. I sheathed my blade and admitted that the beast might be terrifying, but my sister was scarier. Then, something changed. When I turned around, I saw that the beast had reassembled itself. It had not died, it was an undead. I shouted in shock and demanded to know why such a creature was being kept in the basement of the estate. Zenas explained that undead were drawn to the scent of death. He said it must have been attracted to the estate in search of a place to persist, which was why it had ended up in the underground chamber. He added that because it could not be killed by simple decapitation or repeated cuts, they had chosen to contain it instead, treating it as the perfect tool to test strength. He also noted that it helped them dispose of corpses more efficiently. One of the elders expressed concern, stating that even skilled knights struggled to handle undead creatures, yet Zenas was openly expecting me to kill it. They asked if he intended to watch the child of the seven wings die. Zenas replied that if I died, it would only prove that I was a fraud. He added that even my death would not be a problem, as there were still ways to proceed afterward. Maze, however, appeared worried and silently hoped I would survive. Back in the chamber, I continued slashing the beast repeatedly, but there was no effect. Its regenerative ability far exceeded that of a normal undead, and my attacks were not enough to stop it. In addition, an undead was already considered a being that had died once, meaning it could only be fully eliminated through complete destruction. It required either being burned away by sunlight or purified using a weapon imbued with holy power. If neither method was available, the only sensible option was to retreat, as fighting an undead was generally meaningless. However, in my case, I knew there was no path for retreat. I also understood that conventional methods would not align with the power of the seven wings within me. That meant I had no choice but to crush it with overwhelming force to demonstrate what I was truly capable of. I unleashed a powerful attack, and the elders above reacted immediately, rising in their seats as they finally witnessed the power of the seven wings firsthand. My strike sent up a thick cloud of dust that completely engulfed the underground chamber, leaving everyone uncertain of what had just happened. When the dust finally settled, the beast was still moving. Before it could react, it slammed me to the ground. Hifrid called my name in alarm while Maze urged him not to intervene. Hifrid demanded if that meant he was supposed to watch his son die, but Maze told him to calm down and observe carefully. Maze said he could see a smile on my face and believed I still had a hidden card I had not used yet. Tend beneath the beast, I raised my sword and imbued it with mana, releasing a concentrated burst of energy directly into its body. Replicating the same technique Hifrid had shown me in the forest, the beast coughed violently as its internal structure was torn apart by the blast. Since it refused to die, I decided I would keep dismantling it until its life force was completely exhausted. Hifrid was shocked to see me using the technique, since he had only demonstrated it once, yet I was already pushing it further than he had. The sheer output of energy caused the entire underground area to tremble as if it were about to collapse. Several elders panicked and called for Zenas to retreat with them, but Zenas remained completely focused on the fight. He was visibly shaken by the overwhelming power coming from my body and finally seemed to grasp the meaning of the seven wings. Moments later, the shaking stopped. The elders rushed forward to confirm the outcome, but Zenas did not move from his position and had witnessed everything. He concluded that I had trapped the undead in a vortex of magical force and erased it completely. He described it as a raw display of overwhelming force and quantity, an extraordinary feat of magic, though not a refined technique. Even Zenas seemed uncertain, wondering if this was truly the power of the seven wings. He then asked Hifrid if he had taught me what I had just used. Hifrid replied that he had not, and admitted that he was also astonished by how quickly I was growing. Maze immediately asked Zenas if he was satisfied and whether he considered the trial passed. With a stern expression, Zenas asked if anyone objected. No one spoke. Maze then announced that I had passed the trial and instructed that I return to the surface immediately. I remarked lightly that the chain used to lower me had been destroyed and suggested that someone throw down a rope instead. Later, I met Zenas in his office. He offered me a position in the line of succession for the head of the family. I refused. Zenas asked if I was certain, warning that once this opportunity was lost, it might not return. I told him I had no interest in the succession struggle and that my presence would only create unrest among my relatives. Aster told Zenas that he did not belong in the main estate, but rather in Hifrid's household. Zenas replied that he could act humble if he wished, but he could not hide the ambition reflected in his eyes. He said it was obvious that I intended to direct my hostility toward Elmheim in the long run. That statement shocked me. Zenith then asked if the person I was truly after was Roderick. My expression immediately shifted into caution. The old man told me to relax, saying he had no intention of probing my motives at that moment. I asked him why he would let something like that go, since I believed rebels were meant to be treated as enemies. Zenith explained that the house was not a single unified body and that Roderick himself was somewhat of a problem. He said he had no objection to my existence as long as it could serve as a deterrent against Roderick. However, he warned me never to bare my fangs at him again, because next time I might not leave alive. As I exited the room, I could not help but admit to myself that the old man was a monster. In the hallway, Hifrid met me and asked what Zenith had said. I told him that the old man had offered to induct me into the main family, but I had refused. Hifrid was shocked, and even Maze, who was with him, agreed. Maze said I would have been treated far better if I had been formally placed under the main family's protection. I then asked Maze why he had helped me earlier. He pretended not to understand and claimed he had only been amusing himself. He also reminded me that I had now become the master of the 7 wings in name. As we walked through the corridor, I noticed the elders watching me. All of them seemed to share the same intention, to place me under their control now that I had become a valuable asset. Maze told me that I would not be able to avoid it, since those interested in me would only increase as the 7 wings carried immense value. I asked him if he was one of them. He replied that as a director of the Night Academy, scouting promising individuals was part of his role. He then pointed out a blonde elder in the distance and said that man was the same type as well. Before leaving, Maze told me he would be waiting for me to enroll in the Night Academy. I watched him go, still unable to determine whether he was an ally or something else entirely, as he remained too difficult to read. Ifrit placed a hand on my shoulder and suggested we return home, saying he wanted to hear about everything that had happened. I agreed and mentioned that my mother would likely be alarmed once she saw my injuries. Meanwhile, Roderick received a report that his son Dallas had died during Zenith's trial. The report also mentioned that I had been scheduled for the same trial. Roderick asked for details, and the messenger informed him of the 7 wings. However, he did not appear particularly surprised. He explained that the house had maintained a delicate balance of power for years, but that balance might now collapse. The messenger suggested taking action, but Roderick ordered him not to interfere, stating that there was no immediate threat. He also said there was no need to rush, as the 7 wings would eventually become his. Until then, he intended to allow me to move freely, as he wanted to observe how I, the child who had escaped him 10 years earlier, would struggle. 4 years later, I arrived at the Night Academy as the official announcements for applicants were being made. As everyone filled out their forms, attention quickly shifted the moment I walked past. The other applicants seemed to recognize me, and their focus followed me as I moved through the hall. I approached the registration desk, and the official told me I needed to present my wing crest. He explained that they could not allow anyone without magical confirmation, since they had no intention of letting imposters. Then he read my name. His expression changed immediately when he saw my surname, Elmheim. I smiled and asked if I still needed to show my crest, since it was in a rather inconvenient place to access. With a faint smirk, I also asked if my face alone would be enough to register. Later, while I was minding my business, a blonde-haired troublemaker named Smites called out to me. He said he had never seen me among the applicants before and asked if I had come to the wrong place. He told me the exam was reserved for the elite of the elite, and I simply walked past him, saying there was no issue if that was the case. Smites raised his voice, saying that everyone present had undergone rigorous training and had repeatedly returned to attempt this exam. He mocked me for carrying what he called a kid-sized sword, while dreaming of an elite path. He insisted that the exam was not meant for people like me, and casually told me to leave if I was only there to sightsee. The other applicants were not surprised, as this was apparently how Smites treated newcomers every year. However, they could not ignore the fact that he was openly provoking me, the bearer of the 7 wings. Smites himself still had no idea who I was. At that moment, Grian and his entourage arrived. He greeted me as his cousin, saying it had been a while. I offered my condolences regarding Dallas, but Grian dismissed it immediately, saying Dallas was a disgrace who deserved his fate. He even claimed he felt relieved that Dallas was gone, since he had always acted superior simply because he was older. Grian then warned me not to underestimate the main family just because I possessed the 7 wings, reminding me that no one here would be there to protect me. After speaking, Grian and his group left. The other candidates reacted differently, noting that 2 members of the Elmheim main family were present and concluded that it must be an important year. At that point, Smites realized he had made a mistake. He quickly approached me, suddenly changing his attitude and acting friendly. I returned the gesture with a smile and told him he could call me by name. Shortly afterward, We were led to the first examination venue. The official in charge addressed all the candidates, explaining that the royal knights were not like local knights who operated freely in the countryside. He said they protected the king directly and were honored swords who risked their lives for him, meaning there was no place for useless people among them. He instructed us to treat the exam as a battlefield and to show our true worth without restraint. I admitted inwardly that I found his speech excessive, but I did not dwell on it. I only thought that I had finally returned to the academy. In my previous life as a wingless individual, I had never even been allowed to stand here. Beyond this point lay the world of the strong, and the one standing at its peak was Roderick. I resolved that I would catch up to him. However, I understood that I first needed to pass the selection exam. At that moment, the official declared the exam open. Immediately, an applicant collapsed with an arrow piercing his head, making it clear that the trial was not a game. The officials announced that this stage was called the Trial of the Turret, and explained that only those who survived until the end would pass. Arrows began raining down across the hall. Some applicants panicked and ran, only to be struck down. Others formed defensive groups, relying on experience from previous attempts, though I understood their formation would soon reach its limit, as even their method only offered about a 30% survival rate. They expected to see the overwhelming power of those with crest abilities. Some began to assume I had frozen in fear. Brienne also seemed to believe I was finished. However, when the arrows reached me, I repelled them without difficulty. I formed a wind-like barrier with my mana, turning the surrounding space into a rotating current that deflected every incoming strike. The others reacted in shock, unable to understand how not a single arrow reached me. Even the official appeared impressed, noting that I was manipulating mana like a storm. The barrage eventually stopped, and the official confirmed that more candidates had survived than expected. He declared that those who remained had passed the first trial, while the fallen were left behind. He immediately ordered us to proceed to the next trial grounds. Mates complained, calling the official harsh, and I noticed his exhaustion despite the attack being relatively simple. He could not understand how I remained unaffected, while I observed that I had used a significant amount of mana without showing strain. The official also appeared to recognize this, showing interest in how I would perform in the next stage. Brienne, meanwhile, expressed frustration that I had survived, recalling instructions he had received to prevent me from advancing in order to protect Elmheim's interests. At the next trial grounds, the official instructed everyone to exchange their weapons for identical swords to fairness. Smites asked if this was different from before, and I learned that they had never previously enforced weapon standardization. He speculated that the rule might exist because of my sword. At that moment, Grian appeared again and mocked me, saying I had managed to gather a follower in Smites. Smites reacted angrily when he heard Grian's remark, but Grian leaned in close and whispered a warning into his ear. He told him that if he tried to align himself with the wrong person, he would learn a painful lesson. Smites trembled in fear and tried to make Grian retract his words, but Grian ignored him completely. Smites quickly insisted that he had no connection to Aster, but the tension around him only made it clearer how intimidated he was. I observed the situation and recognized that I was standing in a hostile environment. The official then arrived and began explaining the second trial. He stated that it was a siege battle in which participants would be divided into 3 teams. Each team would compete to seize control of camps scattered throughout the forest. A camp would be considered captured once a team raised its flag on the pole. The trial would end at the evening bell, and any team holding 2 or more camps would be declared the winner. He emphasized that destroying or removing flags was forbidden, but beyond that, no restrictions applied, including lethal force. After explaining the rules, the officials announced that team assignments would begin. A smoke signal rose into the sky, marking the start of the trial. Smites immediately explained that this meant only one team out of the 3 could win. I confirmed his understanding and asked if he was worried. Other participants pointed out that the situation essentially meant they would be forced to oppose Elmheim. At that moment, I understood how the situation was shifting. Smites admitted that they were afraid of retaliation from Elmheim, especially because Grian, a young master of the main family, was present. He asked me to imagine what would happen if someone pointed a sword at Grian during the trial. He expressed fear that such an action could lead to consequences affecting entire families. He concluded that everyone was afraid of becoming an enemy of Elmheim. He suggested that there would always be another opportunity in future trials and that it would be safer to avoid risking their lives here. In the end, I was effectively left alone in a team-based battle. I understood their fear. Elmheim was truly terrifying, a family that ruled like tyrants who could not be challenged. In this trial, Grime represented that fear itself. Even though they believed I would not understand their hesitation, I realized that from an outsider's perspective, I was no different from them. As I moved toward the nearest flag, I noticed that the forest was unusually quiet. I began to wonder whether no one had engaged in combat yet. It is either that they were being cautious or that something else was at play. Soon after, I encountered a man holding a yellow flag. He looked surprised to see me, as if my arrival matched something he had been warned about. I noticed immediately that he had already taken down his own camp's flag. He then threw the yellow flag upward, and at the same moment, a red flag belonging to Grian's team appeared in the distance. It became clear that the yellow flag team and the red flag team had formed an alliance.
In the second trial siege battle, the 20 participants were divided into 3 teams. The team that occupied 2 or more bases by the end would become the winner. In other words, raising our team's flag in the enemy base was the absolute requirement to pass. I asked the guy why he was using the red flag if he was not part of the yellow team. He simply told me he had formed an alliance, somewhere above us. An examiner watched the battle unfold. Christopher Nolan had 5 wings, but during the first trial he had been overshadowed by me, the one who possessed 7 wings. Both of us were skilled swordsmen, so he said it would be a shame if we failed. I asked him if he understood that only one team could win. He casually replied that was why he had decided to side with the main house. He then revealed that the others had probably already gone to attack my base. I asked if they had threatened him. He told me nobody would be foolish enough to stand in the path of carriage. Knight nobility followed a strict hierarchy, so he claimed it was only natural behavior. I blocked his attack, but then I noticed my sword. I remember the examiner had given me a fake sword back then. Christopher, feeling confident, told me not to be scared because this was strictly a one-on-one duel. He said he had never liked Elmheim, especially show-offs like me. He landed an attack that shattered my sword. I immediately picked up a broken piece and threw it at him. He blocked it easily, but I used that moment to escape, shouting that I would settle things later. He started feeling proud of himself, believing he had scared me away. Then he noticed the shattered piece of the sword. After picking it up, he could not believe how poor the quality was. He realized it had been a pathetic trick from Elmheim. I returned to my base and saw my cousin mocking Christopher for not even being able to buy time after boasting that he could handle me alone. He then asked how things had gone on my end and revealed they had already secured their 3rd base. I interrupted him and asked what he had done to my comrades. He went silent. Then someone pointed a sword at my back. It was my comrades reminding me of what they had said before. Those idiots had actually dared to defy Elmheim. My cousin told me they had not shown even the slightest resistance. He mocked them, saying that even monkeys seemed smart enough not to stand against Elmheim. He asked if I really thought gathering numbers would let me defeat him. He claimed I was mistaken because they had already won. The victory condition was to secure 2 or more bases by the end. Even if I ran around desperately, I did not have enough manpower to protect the flags, and the moment I left, they would simply repeat the process. As long as they maintained control, they would be fine. I coldly replied that I would make sure he could not do that. I cut down every one of them. Fear instantly appeared on their faces.
However, my cousin only smirked. He told me I was bluffing and that exposing my sword made it clear I had no real advantage. He said that no matter how strong my wings were, without a proper sword, I was no different from being wingless. He then questioned whether I intended to fight everyone alone. I smiled, realizing he thought he had already won. I unsheathed my broken sword, which caused confusion among those watching. I threw it aside and told him that he had thought too simply. My cousin frowned, believing the situation had turned in his favor. The moment the blade touched the ground, I moved. I struck the man behind me with a single kick, sending him flying, then caught his sword mid-motion. I immediately followed with a slash that forced the remaining opponents to recoil in shock. I pointed the stolen blade toward my cousin and told him that underestimating me had been his mistake, and that it would cost him the fight. My cousin staggered back, shouting in anger and disbelief. I gathered force into my legs and launched myself upward. As he tried to retreat and draw his sword to defend himself, I broke through his guard with a single strike. In that moment, I remembered the time I had fallen through the sky in my previous life and how powerless I had once been. Now, while manipulating magic power, I felt the complete reversal of that helplessness. I closed the distance and told him that having a wing crest was convenient, but that the wall he relied on was already meaningless to me. He panicked, his body trembling as I prepared my next attack. The impact of my strike exploded through the forest, sending dust and shockwaves in every direction. The other participants paused, confused by the nature of the fighting style being used. Then they noticed movement. I walked out carrying my beaten cousin. I threw him to the ground and called him what he had acted like, a thief. He ordered the remaining fighters to attack me, screaming that it was a command from Elmheim. One of them rushed to obey. I asked them whether they were truly afraid of Elmheim's retaliation. They admitted that they were. They said that as third-rate nobles, they would be crushed without hesitation if Elmheim decided to target them, and that they had no choice but to obey. They assumed I would not understand their position because I came from privilege. I smiled at that. The one who was afraid demanded to know why I was smiling. I told them that my sister had once said something similar, and that while I had my own answer to it, the fact that I was privileged was undeniable. That was why I would handle it in my own way. I then declared that my enemy was the main house itself, current Elmheim order, and that I would personally crush it. A wave of fear ran through them. My cousin could not believe what he had just heard. One of them told me that if I truly understood what I had just said, I would realize it was already a declaration of war. He said that no matter how I tried to disguise it, what awaited me was betrayal and a miserable end, and that if I did not want that outcome, I would have to fight. He added that the power I carried on my back made that possible. My cousin shouted at them, saying he would remember every one of their faces and names and that they knew exactly what would happen to them. Smites was unable to respond at first. He said nothing, then silently threw down his sword and walked toward the blue flag. He admitted that I had given him false hope, and that even if nothing changed, he would still hold a grudge, even if he was weak. Still, he fulfilled the promise he had made and raised the blue flag, introducing himself as someone who supported me after. The others were stunned by his decision, and Grian's expression twisted with anger. Smites then shouted at the remaining participants, asking what they were waiting for. He urged them to take this chance to show the Almheim faction what they were made of, and to place their stakes on the power of the Seven Wings. I felt a strange sense of relief, realizing I no longer needed to focus on capturing flags. However, I also understood that it was still not enough. My cousin remained confident, calling the situation hopeless for me. One of his companions asked if he was all right, but Grian only insulted him in return, recalling my earlier words and insisting that I was nothing like his dead brother and that he could not allow things to end here. Another voice then spoke up, remarking that Grian had become a pathetic sight since the last time they met. Grian quickly seized the opportunity, asking where he had been and claiming that dealing with me was his responsibility. He smiled, believing he still had full control of the situation. He admitted that while we were not equal in terms of mana, his swordsmanship remained superior. He ordered the others to cut me down.
Suddenly, the flag landed on Graham's face as Nolan said he had come to return it,
stating that Grian's methods went against his code of chivalry and officially canceled their alliance. The morale of the other participants dropped instantly as the situation collapsed into disorder. Grian confronted me, asking whether I thought I could complete the exam without fighting him. He declared that this was a clash between his swordsmanship and my 7 wings. He released his aura and struck with a powerful swing, but I stopped his blade at the tip of my sword. He asked what I meant earlier when I said not yet, and quickly repositioned himself, insisting that only one team could pass. He said that if both of us intended to become royal knights, there was no other choice but to settle it here. I looked away and replied that this would be a problem because I wanted him to become one as well. He froze and asked me what I meant. I told everyone that it would be meaningless to reignite their fighting spirit, only to tell them to give up because they were on different teams. With a calm smile, I said I had a plan that would allow everyone to pass, but I explained that if I was going to pull this off, I needed their cooperation. The first step I took was approaching my cousin. I told him plainly that we should put everything aside and make up, at least temporarily. After that, even the examiner seemed unable to process what was happening as he watched the flags being handled together. The participants began to question whether we even understood the rules. I reminded them that the condition required occupying at least 2 bases, but nowhere in the rules did it state that only one team could raise a flag in a single territory. I stated that we were forming an alliance. The examiner immediately became furious, asking whether I was mocking the entire exam. The other participants had already lost confidence and insisted that the plan would not work. He then challenged me directly, asking if I would simply negotiate with an enemy stronghold if I were ordered to wipe it out, as if it were something that could be resolved with a handshake. I responded that a life was worth more than death. This only made him more angry. He declared that a knight is a sword and that knights do not question orders or calculations. I then asked him calmly whether he intended to disqualify us since we had not broken any rules. I pointed out that if this was purely his personal judgment, then it was nothing more than ego. I added that if everyone failed here, I wondered whether the heads of the main families would come for the examiner himself. That statement made him pause in thought. Time passed, and we waited for over an hour for a decision. Smites asked if we were going to be disqualified, but I told him that at the very least, we had proven that our proposal was worth considering. I looked at my cousin, who remained silent throughout. Smites was surprised that my cousin had actually cooperated. I simply said it was nothing special. Then the doors opened, drawing everyone's attention. A guard announced that the principal would now address us. Without hesitation, everyone turned toward the authorities. The director entered with a strict and imposing posture while his subordinates instructed everyone to remain attentive. Smites quietly asked if that was really the director, noting that he looked like an ordinary old man. I told him to show more respect. The director, Mimir, immediately recognized me. He explained that approving such a large number of candidates at once was unprecedented. He added that some had even suggested restarting the exam, but the other directors supported the decision to accept the situation as it was. I asked what this meant for us. Despite the tension, Mimir remained calm and direct. He announced that all remaining candidates had passed. Declaration struck the hall like an explosion. The remaining participants reacted with shock and excitement, unable to believe the outcome. The director formally congratulated us and welcomed us into the night academy. Later that night, the tension finally eased as we were allowed to rest in the academy's hot springs. The others enjoyed the atmosphere, speaking excitedly about the food and the facilities. One of them admitted that none of this would have been possible without me. I remained slightly embarrassed by the attention, while the others continued to express their respect and insisted they would follow my lead from then on. Nolan grumbles at the group, calling them opportunists. He points out that not long ago, they were following Grian like loyal lackeys, so he has no intention of thanking anyone. One of the boys teases him for losing the earlier fight, but Nolan snaps back that it was merely a draw. Aster cuts through the argument, telling them the details don't matter anymore. They challenged the Elmheim main house and still made it into the academy, so at this point, they are all students. With a steady voice, he adds that these small victories will eventually become a wave strong enough to crush the ducal family. He then declares that this moment marks the true beginning of their rebellion. Afterward, Aster briefly thinks about his sisters, especially Althen, concluding that as a veteran knight candidate, she will likely become a strong ally in the academy. He shifts focus back to the present and announces that their real training begins tomorrow. As he steps out of the bath, he suddenly notices strange movement behind him. A large group of recruits is gathered, staring intently at his magical crest. Startled, Aster jumps back and demands what they are doing. They excitedly explain that the 7 wings is considered a symbol of luck and divine blessing, and they were hoping to gain fortune by looking at it. Aster, both annoyed and confused, immediately tells them to stop, insisting it doesn't work that way. From a distance, Nolan watches silently, avoiding the chaos. He sighs while looking up at the moon, already sensing that life at the academy is going to be far more troublesome than expected. Far away in the main mansion, Helen stands in the courtyard, visibly disappointed in Grian's failure. She is furious after hearing rumors that a new recruit openly declared hostility toward the ducal house. Cannot believe he survived such a confrontation without punishment. On the ground, Grian begs for forgiveness, promising to correct his mistake next time. But before he can finish, he is violently kicked in the face. Liliane steps forward, furious, shouting that there will be no next time for useless trash like him. She insults him harshly, comparing him to the late Darius, and stamps down on him without mercy as he begs pitifully for life. Overcome with pure disgust, Liliane unleashes a brutal series of kicks on her relative's fallen body. The memory of the 7 Wings user resurfaces in his thoughts the moment he was forced to cooperate just to avoid walking away empty-handed. Aster had warned him coldly, if the Duke learned of his failure, he would likely be eliminated for bringing shame to the family. The redhead had frozen in terror at those words. The weight of his possible execution pressed down on him as Aster continued, describing in detail how ugly and meaningless his end would be if he kept resisting. Leaning in, Aster had whispered that it was not a dignified death and that cooperating was the only way to avoid ending up the same way. In exchange for his obedience, Aster offered a temporary truce to ensure his survival during the exam. Back in the present, Liliane is interrupted as Helen steps in, ordering her to stop and spare the boy's life. Julius enters the room, calmly observing the scene and stating they should forgive their cute little brother since they are family. He gently strokes Alphen's hair, speaking with unsettling warmth as he asks for her opinion. Alphen remains frozen, head lowered, eyes wide with fear. Julius remarks that the image of absolute dominance has always been essential to keep the knights in line. Liliane listens as he warns that this control is now weakening due to the sudden emergence of the 7 Wings. With cold intent, Julius declares that it is now the sisters' responsibility to remind the world who truly holds power. Liliane agrees immediately, stating angrily that they will prove the main lineage is not merely symbolic. With a twisted smile, Julius tells her to show the youngest what true violence really means. The next day, all first-year recruits gather in the academy's massive courtyard under the bright sun. An instructor steps forward, congratulating them on reaching the first stage of becoming Royal Knights. He emphasizes that the Royal Knights are an elite force that must crush all opposition, demanding absolute perfection in both combat and strategy. The instructor banged on the lectern and warned that anyone aspiring to become a Royal Knight must prove they are truly exceptional. He explained that the Academy divided students into 6 levels, with missions assigned according to individual skill, and that strength determined access to advanced techniques. He dismissed ordinary swordsmen as mediocrities. He moved at extreme speed and stated that those who could only manipulate magic were also second-rate. I watched his display of power with interest. I focused on his words that only the perfect combination of magic and swordsmanship made a knight truly lethal. He continued challenging all the recruits to prove themselves. I stepped forward without hesitation and released a strike surrounded by purple mana. I cut through a reinforced magical iron pillar cleanly and stated that everything was fine. The instructor pointed out the destruction and instructed the other recruits to attempt the same level. I sheathed my blade and walked away from the center of the arena calmly. From the balcony, 2 veteran nobles observed the scene. One analyzed the destroyed pillar and confirmed that I was undeniably talented. His companion warned that the potential of the 7 wings went far beyond what they had seen, and that I might eventually be consumed by it. He added that the real danger within the academy came from hidden monsters. Later, I stood in the academy corridor and observed the surroundings through the window while reflecting on the ranking system. Mates complained beside me that even after passing the exam, the academy continued to test everyone relentlessly, recalling that Nolan and I were the only recruits who did not start at rank 6. Mate stared at his lower-ranked plate and admitted in frustration that he already expected to be left behind. To encourage him, I showed him my rank 4 badge and reminded him that everyone would eventually need to reach rank 2. Joking about the pressure, Smates called me boss and complained that I was too strict. I was caught off guard by the title and honestly had no idea what he was talking about. Smates then became serious and asked if I had already forgotten the promise I made. The memory of my declaration resurfaced as he reminded me that I had vowed to crush the Duke House. He explained that many people had taken those words seriously and now expected me to change their lives. With complete sincerity, he asked me to trust them and allow the group to help carry that burden. He patted my shoulder excitedly, gestured that we destroy the enemy family together. Hearing that support made me smile. I admitted that I needed to become stronger if I wanted to protect the people standing beside me. At that moment, I fully accepted the weight of the promise I had made, knowing I would need overwhelming strength to fulfill it. I then cut through the serious atmosphere and declared that our highest priority was food. I explained that none of us would survive afternoon training on an empty stomach. However, Smate suddenly noticed the crowd blocking the hallway and found it suspicious. As we approached the cafeteria, several students desperately warned us that members of the main family had already taken over the place. Inside, a young noble sat comfortably while eating bread. My expression darkened immediately as the sadistic noble claimed he grew tired of waiting and decided to eat first. Resting his feet arrogantly on the table, he cynically referred to me as his younger brother. The moment I looked at him, I immediately realized who he was. The surrounding students confirmed the rumors at once. The cruel young man was Julius, second in line for succession within the ducal family. Beside him stood his equally dangerous sister, Liliane. The siblings were infamous throughout the kingdom for being ruthless tyrants. Cold sweat ran down my back as I realized I had completely forgotten they were attending the academy as well. Liliane casually stomped on the head of a masked recruit lying on the floor before complimenting my appearance and mocking the ugliness of the boy beneath her feet. A recruit lay agonizing on the cafeteria floor with his head trapped inside a metal mask, groaning in pain without any way to defend himself. Smate stared at the bizarre scene and questioned what kind of grotesque helmet it was. I immediately recognized it as the infamous iron shackle. It was a torture device used by powerful nobles to punish severe failures. Julius grabbed the victim by the clothes and mocked the fact that someone from a lesser branch knew about it. Sitting on top of the subdued student, he criticized him for carrying the family name while still remaining at rank 6. Gripping the metal mask tightly, Julius cynically commented on how pathetic the boy had become. Smirking, he claimed the iron shackle was actually a gift meant to motivate his little brother to work harder. Looking around the cafeteria, I noticed several other students wearing the same device. It became obvious that the masks were being used as punishment and role. Julius calmly explained that people worked themselves to exhaustion once they realized they would suffocate if they failed to remove the mask in time. His mates panicked when he noticed how many recruits were imprisoned like that. Without changing his relaxed posture, Julius pointed out that everyone there had desperate, hungry eyes before ordering the freshmen to greet the veterans properly. He then rested his hand on the shoulder of a gagged red-haired girl and told her not to be ashamed to show her face. Slow footsteps echoed throughout the cafeteria as Julius remarked that it had been a long time since we last met. The girl stepped forward, and the moment I saw her, I froze in complete shock. My eyes widened as I stared at the cruel scene unfolding before me. Julius spread his arms mockingly and sarcastically, asked if my older sister did not look like a completely different person now. Wearing the iron shackle and standing in silence, Alphen confirmed my worst fears. The moment I saw her in that condition, desperation overwhelmed me. I completely lost control and shouted her name at the top of my lungs. Alphen kept staring at the floor, but even through the iron mask, I could feel the sadness in her. The sight of my injured sister awakened a violent fury inside me. I cursed Julius as a scoundrel and demanded to know what he had done to her. Suddenly, an iron mask was tossed across the floor, crashing loudly against the stone near me. Completely calm despite my murderous outburst, Julius simply told me to calm down. The iron shackle rolled across the floor before stopping beside the injured recruit lying nearby. I halted my attack the moment Julius coldly announced that he had prepared enough masks for everyone. Julius stomped on the fallen coward and revealed a massive pile of iron shackles behind him. With a twisted grin, he invited the freshmen to what he called a fun little party. At his command, masked upperclassmen violently threw students across the cafeteria, spreading chaos everywhere. Julius announced that anyone who wanted to eat properly that day would first have to wear an iron mask. Smates desperately fought back while shouting that the entire situation was insane. Beside him, Nolan crossed swords with one of the attackers and immediately realized these upperclassmen were among the academy's elite. Even he could tell their level was far beyond ordinary students. Overwhelmed by the pressure, Smates panicked and shouted at me, asking what we were supposed to do. My body overflowed with a violent red aura as I gripped my sword in pure fury. Ignoring the chaos around me, I walked straight through the middle of the cafeteria. Even the bystanders froze after sensing the overwhelming magical pressure radiating from me. I stared directly at Julius and coldly demanded to know what he was trying to accomplish. Maintaining his arrogant posture, Julius calmly raised his hand and mockingly told me not to get so worked up. He insulted my friends, calling them trash who only passed the entrance exam through luck. Sitting comfortably on his improvised throne, he complained that the quality of the new freshman was pathetic. Behind him, Liliane arrogantly agreed and declared that weaklings like them should never have been allowed into the academy. Julius casually swung another iron shackle through the air and claimed he was simply handling things the traditional Elmheim way. I suddenly noticed movement below him. Having no patience left for his speeches, I ordered them to remove the gag from my sister immediately. I launched myself forward and unleashed a full-force attack, intending to cut Julius down on the spot. However, Liliane intercepted my strike head-on and blocked it with scarlet magic. While forcing my blade back with brute strength, she mocked me for holding such childish hatred in my heart. Laughing at the situation, Julius calmly declared that Alphen was wearing the iron mask by her own choice. To make things worse, he pointed directly at her and demanded that she confirm it in front of everyone. Liliane giggled and taunted me by saying my older brother was far too cruel. Seeing Alphen standing there in silence made me remember how worried our mother had always been about the cruelty of the main family. Liliane immediately followed up with a heavy counterattack, but I blocked it with my red blade in a violent clash that echoed through the cafeteria. Right in the middle of the exchange, I suddenly noticed a white blur rushing toward me. Acting on instinct, I barely dodged a nearly fatal strike and froze in shock after realizing that Alphen herself had attacked me. At the same moment, Nolan jumped into the fight and shouted that he would handle Julius himself. Standing on top of the table, Julius released a burst of flames and sneered that he felt disgusted hearing someone like Nolan call himself a knight. Behind his steel defense, Nolan glared back and ordered Julius to get off his throne and fight properly like a real man.
Nolan suddenly charged at Julius, shouting that he would carve the arrogance of House Nolan into him. At that exact moment, one of the iron masks clattered onto the floor. Julius raised his blade and mockingly asked Nolan if spending more time studying had somehow made him a better swordsman. Nolan froze in shock as Julius' body suddenly ignited in flames. Julius told him he understood nothing about true strength. In the next instant, Nolan's sword became engulfed in fire, and the flames rapidly spread across his body. Julius grinned wickedly and declared that the strongest person was always the one in control. Before Nolan could recover, Julius kicked him away like he was nothing more than a stray animal. Smates immediately rushed over and asked if he was all right, but Nolan could only lie helplessly on the ground while half of his body looked completely burned. As Smates tried to help him up, a cold voice echoed through the room. Liliane said she liked men who carried themselves with fake nobility. She smirked and announced that she had decided to keep Nolan as her personal pet. However, she casually added that she had no use for the bearded guy standing beside him. Julius slowly walked forward and declared that weakness itself was a sin. Liliane followed by saying that only the strong possessed the right to say whatever they pleased. Then Julius turned toward me and asked if I had not used my own power to gather allies around me. Behind him, my comrades desperately pleaded for help while still trapped inside the iron masks. Julius continued approaching me before asking which side I intended to choose in the end. Filled with rage, I charged straight at Julius with my sword coated in aura. I aimed directly for his neck, intending to end the fight in a single strike. But Julius stopped my attack as if it meant absolutely nothing. The sight left me completely stunned. Before I could react, he grabbed me by the shoulder and unleashed his flames at point-blank range. Agonizing heat tore through my body, forcing a scream out of me. Smates shouted my name in terror as he watched helplessly. Julius stared at me coldly and asked if this was truly all the power the seven wings possessed. Julius coldly said he expected the seven wings to be far more useful than this. I told him not to get cocky just because he managed to block a single attack from me. The next instant, a violent surge of power erupted around my body. Julius immediately realized something was wrong. I was absorbing his magical energy and turning it into my own strength. Before he could react, I unleashed another attack. This time, the strike landed directly on him and blasted him across the room. As he crashed backward, I calmly asked him what he had been saying earlier because I had not heard it clearly. I mocked him, saying he had been rambling on about something pointless. Then I asked him if he could repeat it one more time. I pretended to think for a moment before recalling that it was something about trash keeping their mouths shut.
Beside the injured Nolan, Smates finally let out a relieved sigh after seeing the amount of damage I caused. Even Lillian lost her arrogant composure for a moment because she could not believe someone had actually managed to knock her brother down. A few seconds later, Julius slowly rose from the rubble while brushing dust off his clothes. He admitted that the attack actually hurt before laughing loudly and challenging me to try damaging the sacred seven wings for real. The moment Smates realized Julius was still overflowing with energy after taking such a direct hit, his face turned pale in fear. Lillian, on the other hand, immediately regained her sadistic smile. Mocking her brother, she called him pathetic for getting pushed around by a freshman like me. My dagger remained planted in the ground as a deadly silence spread across the hall. Then Julius roared my name in fury, while flames erupted wildly around his body. I remained completely calm even as Julius drowned the cafeteria in flame. My scarlet mana surrounded me like a shield, and I did not even blink while facing him. Without hesitation, he charged straight at me with a massive fire attack aimed to kill. I met the attack head-on. Right before the clash could escalate any further, a mysterious force suddenly separated us. Out of nowhere, Count Maze stepped between us with a cynical smile resting on his face. He casually rested his sword on his shoulder and announced that he had no choice but to interfere in the mess we created. Julius clicked his tongue in annoyance and ordered the director to stay out of his business. Maze ignored the threat completely and waved his hand as if Julius meant nothing to him. Then he calmly pointed out that causing such a spectacle inside the academy reflected badly on the Elmheim family. After that, he politely instructed Julius to put away his weapon and end the fight immediately. Realizing he had lost the advantage, Julius reluctantly lowered his guard and sheathed his blade. Complaining that the mood had been ruined, he called for his followers and announced that the welcome party was over for the day. The moment he turned his back, I tried to go after him, but Maze grabbed my arm and stopped me. Tightening his grip slightly, he quietly apologized before telling me to let the matter go, for now if I wanted to protect my reputation inside the academy. Over his shoulder, I looked toward my sister. Alphen stood silently with her head lowered while the iron shackle still covered her face. She could not even look me in the eyes. After everyone left, I remained alone in the ruined cafeteria, staring at the torture mask lying on the floor. Later, inside Maze's office, I cursed Julius and called him a complete monster. I remembered how Nolan ended up covered in burns and wrapped in bandages after that fight. To make matters worse, Lillian had taken the rest of my allies away while forcing those iron shackles onto them. Smates crossed his arms nervously and asked what we were supposed to do next. Still glaring at Maze, I admitted that I could have settled everything myself if he had not interrupted the battle. Smates immediately panicked and scolded me for speaking to the director so disrespectfully, but Maze only laughed at the situation. With an amused expression, the blue-haired noble finally asked me what kind of relationship I thought we had. I stayed silent while carefully studying him. Memories of the main house resurfaced in my mind because he had been the only elder who showed any sign of helping me there. Even so, I still could not tell whether he was truly an ally or another enemy hiding behind a smile. Breaking the silence, Smates stepped forward and asked Maze to explain the real rules governing the academy. Smates could no longer hide his frustration and demanded to know whether the academy truly intended to allow such tyranny to continue unchecked. Resting his chin against his hand, Maze calmly reminded us that he was also part of the ducal house's administration. While staring at the iron shackle in my hand, I realized that imprisoning students like this was not considered a serious crime inside the academy. Maze explained without emotion that the institution judged everything based purely on merit. According to him, Julius's brutal methods were tolerated because they forced weak recruits to become stronger. The moment I heard that, I lowered my head and understood that I could not rely on anyone in that place. Just as I was about to leave the office, Maze warned me not to do anything reckless like storming the main family directly to rescue my allies. His expression darkened as he explained that every movement inside the academy was constantly monitored by the main house. He warned me that under the shadow of the ducal family, Any rebellion that failed would immediately lead to expulsion. Standing at the doorway, I glared back at him and declared that none of that was enough reason to abandon my comrades. I tightened my grip around the iron shackle and admitted that the problem went far beyond simple justice. Images of the broken students in the cafeteria replayed in my mind. Those masks did not only torture people physically, they destroyed their spirit until they became obedient tools who no longer had the will to resist. Maze studied my expression carefully before asking if I truly understood the terror behind those shackles. With a cold smile, I admitted that I knew exactly what happened to people who lost themselves to that kind of fear. Standing beside Smates, I swore that I would never allow my allies to end up like that. My determination seemed to amuse Maze because he crossed his arms and observed me with growing interest. I calmly explained that I had no intention of hitting expelled over a reckless move either. Curious, Maze asked whether I already had some kind of insane plan prepared. The sound of metal cracking echoed through the office as the iron shackle slowly crumbled in my hand while I prepared to reveal my trump card. 3 days later, everyone was running through the training grounds while the instructors screamed at us not to slow down. Mates looked toward Nolan and asked if he was really fine training with all his injuries, but Nolan replied that it was not the time to rest because the 4th grade curriculum was already beginning. He added that his wounds were nothing compared to what I was enduring. Then he glanced toward me and admitted that I was the one everyone should truly be worried about. A few days earlier, I had gone to meet Julius and Lillian again despite everything that happened in the cafeteria. Julius was still furious about our last encounter, but I told him plainly that I had come to negotiate for the release of my sister and allies. I threw one of the iron shackles onto the table and offered a trade. In exchange for freeing them, I would willingly wear the iron mask myself. The moment I said that, Alphen looked completely horrified. Lillian stared at me like I had gone insane and asked if I was seriously volunteering to become their pet. Julius admitted that I truly was becoming a thorn in the side of the Elmheim family, but he also believed the academy directors would enjoy seeing me broken. Even so, he clearly did not trust me. He asked what kind of trick I was planning, but I calmly told him that I had no hidden scheme. While staring directly into his eyes, I reminded him that the mask was sealed with magic and that only they possessed the key to remove it. I mocked him by asking whether he lacked the confidence to break me completely. The moment I said that, the heat from Julius's rage became so intense that the glass in his hand melted instantly. After a long silence, he finally accepted the bet. But according to him, simply switching places with my allies would be boring. Instead, he declared that I would spend 10 entire days without food or water while wearing the shackle. If I somehow survived after that, everyone would be set free. Alphen desperately tried signaling to me that it was impossible and that I would die if I accepted those conditions. Even so, I agreed immediately. I understood better than anyone how those iron shackles destroyed the human spirit, because in my past life I had seen countless people reduced to empty tools by them. Looking at Alphen standing there helplessly only strengthened my resolve. The sister I remembered was stubborn and strong even when she was hurting, yet now she could not even raise her head. As Lillian placed the iron mask onto my face, I quietly promised Alphen that I would break those chains first. After that, we would finally have time to talk about everything that happened. Back in the present, several recruits collapsed onto the ground from exhaustion during training. The instructor screamed at them for trying to rest while my cousin cursed the academy in his mind and wondered why he had to suffer through such hell. Mates called the instructor a demon and complained that at this rate the prisoners would collapse before I could save them. Nolan, however, coldly replied that for some people, this suffering was simply karma catching up to them. Mates encouraged the others to keep enduring, but when he looked at me, his expression changed completely. Several days had already passed, yet I continued running as though nothing was wrong. Deep down, Nolan admitted to himself that an ordinary person could only survive 3 or 4 days without water and perhaps a week without food under normal conditions. Considering the brutal training we were enduring every day, he believed I should already be at my limit. Then he mentioned a rumor he once heard about me. According to the story, when I was found as an infant, I had supposedly crawled alone through snowy mountains for miles while covered in bruises and wounds. Nolan admitted that if the story were true, it would explain why my life force seemed abnormal. Even so, he still believed the rumor sounded too ridiculous to be real. As night fell, the masked recruits were gathered inside a sealed room when Lillian entered and announced that it was time for the rats to eat. With a casual flick of her hand, the shackles on them opened and the only food provided was a single scrap of cheese. One of the masked recruits broke down in exhaustion, saying he was going to die at this rate. Nearby, Nolan begged his sister for more food, but she stepped on the piece of cheese and crushed it beneath her foot. She told him that if he did not want it, he should simply say so, but he should not waste it because, unlike them, someone else was being treated even worse. In response, a recruit who was calmly eating a steak referred to me as a saint. That person was Julius, who sat there smiling as he casually ate while observing everything. He asked Alphen to go and check on me, but at the same time mocked her for not being able to face me directly, since I was suffering because of her. Alphen gritted her teeth in frustration, unsure of what she could do. Julius also looked confused, thinking he was certain I had some kind of trick prepared to escape the situation. However, seeing that I was not resisting at all, he wondered if I was simply enduring everything on purpose. Smiling to himself, he decided to watch how long my pride would last, intending to witness every moment of my struggle without interfering.